but we'd like to express our gratitude for this opportunity to participate in these proceedings. At the commencement of these public hearings, we stated that our goal was to get to the truth about why the government invoked the public order emergency. We wanted to hear evidence about whether the government met the legal threshold for invoking the Emergencies Act. And Commissioner, we have heard we've heard evidence on many issues, but the reasons why the Emergencies Act was invoked is the primary and ultimate issue you should turn your mind to. I won't repeat the test for declaring a public order emergency because we've all heard it so many times. But I would like to address just one part of that test, threats to the security of Canada. In one way, this is a very high threshold for the government to meet, because threats to the security of Canada means more than ordinary threats or acts of violence. The definition requires serious violence or threats of serious violence for the purpose of achieving political, religious, or ideological objective. In our written submissions, we'll be looking at, among other things, the definition of terrorist activity is set out in the Criminal Code and how it is similar to the CSIS definition. And in fact, some of the CSIS documents that were disclosed to the parties through this inquiry show that CSIS refers to Section 2C as terrorism and extreme violence. And this reference is indicative of just how high that threshold is. We submit, and the Prime Minister's evidence left little doubt, that this very high threshold is the same whether it applies in the Emergencies Act or the CSIS Act. The context, the decision maker, and the purpose are obviously different. There may even be different inputs, but those inputs are meant to answer the same question. Are there threats or acts of serious violence for political, religious, or ideological purposes? And that is the one and only standard. Commissioner, I've made reference to how high the threshold is, but in a different way, it's a low threshold. And on the issue of threats to security of Canada, it doesn't require, for example, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, nor does it even require proof on a balance of probabilities. The threshold only requires the Governor and Council to actually believe that there are threats to the security of Canada, and it requires that belief to be reasonable. And respectfully, we submit, and we will argue in detail, that the government has not even met this low threshold. There may be reasonable grounds to believe that some acts of violence were happening. Ripping off masks, police officers being swarmed, eggs being thrown, coffee being thrown. These and other things may have happened in the protest, which was of unprecedented proportions. And let me be clear, that is not acceptable. But those acts do not rise to the level of violence or threats which are required by the Act. And further, they do not reflect the attitudes, actions, and values of the vast majority of peaceful protesters. Even the most significant threat we heard of, which was the presence of weapons in Coots, does not meet this threshold. And even if it did, it was neutralized. Those alleged criminals were sitting in an Alberta jail when the Emergencies Act was invoked. The threshold requires present threats, not past threats, not fear of the unknown. Canadians and even the international community are and will continue to be divided over the Freedom Convoy protests. Canadians will also be divided over future protests. As one of my friends aptly observed, tomorrow's protest could be about environmental issues, or it could be about some other political cause. To safeguard democracy, the rule of law, and the cherished right to protest for everyone, no matter what you believe, we must ensure that the Emergencies Act is only used as a last resort in the direst circumstances. Our detailed submissions will follow We'd like to thank you again, Commissioner, Commissioner Council, and Commission Council, and the parties.